Hello everybody, today another installment in my series of A Life in Cars, where I introduce you to some of the petrolhead people behind the amazing vehicles I've been allowed to drive and share with you all. Today's subject is a lovely guy, and when I first met him he owned both a Bentley Brooklands and a Ferrari F12, which you may recognise. If you've been enjoying these videos, don't forget not just to hit the like button, comment down below and subscribe, but also to share this video with your friends. To whet your appetite, here's what you can look forward to in today's interview.
We were mad about cars. In the period it was off being repaired, somebody rear-ended it and wrote it off again, so it got written off twice. The 8 Series wasn't a BMW 8 Series. People either hate them because they think they're ugly as sin, or they love them because they think they're beautiful. And I was in the love them, think they're beautiful, and I absolutely think they are the most stunning thing. In flat green with a red coach line and a special button to call the police, the armed forces in an emergency, and I thought that would be just the car that would be perfect for my wedding. I lost a ruckload of cash on my car, my Supra car. Hi, I'm Guy Butler. I was born down in the Welsh Valleys in Bridgend, and I'm absolutely mad about cars, rallying, motorsport, anything about cars basically. I was born and raised in a little village in the Welsh Valleys called Aberkenfig, which is just, you'll have gone past Sarn Services, I think it's junction 36 of the M4, and a big flyover, and that was built when I was a kid. It was amazing seeing a big engineering project just at the bottom of our garden. And my father was a local butcher, and we had a little fleet of Morris Minor vans, and not a big butcher, just a normal little meat trader. He built his own factory and started selling to hospitals and schools and doing bigger things. But Dad had a bit of a history behind him, and so did my mum. They both loved rallying. So they met at Motor Club, Bridgend Motor Club, and my mum, her dad was a car dealer at a Morris garage, and my dad, he was a butcher. His dad died young, so he had a few more pounds than the next person, was able to buy a Lotus Cortina and decided he was going to go rallying. But this was very young in both of their lives. In their late 20s, they got stuck into rallying. So my father had a Lotus Cortina and went and did the Scottish Rally, which was a really big deal in those days. It probably ran on for 5 days. And you didn't transport your car up to the rally, you drove it from the Welsh Valleys all the way up to Glasgow, where I think it was based. And that's actually quite a big deal because it was a 4-speed Lotus engined car, and they broke their gearbox when they got to Birmingham, had to be towed all the way back from Birmingham to the Welsh Valleys, rebuild the gearbox and get back up to Glasgow for the start of the Scottish Rally. So we were mad about cars, but then it's quite an interesting change. My dad had kids and that was it. Cars disappeared from our life. So I arrived into a household with no cool cars at all. We had a ST1 Rover V8, UOK 117S was the registration. I remember it to this day. 3.5 litre V8, and it boiled so much my father got fed up of it. And in 1985 he bought a newfangled diesel engined Sierra Estate, the very cheapest one he could find. I think it was £9,900 for a brand new B251 BTX. And he bought it, and we ended up doing hundreds of thousands of miles in it, and it was poverty spec. It was the absolute basic. It had wheel trims, but they got stolen in France, so we put the little hub nut covers that came in with the even lower specification non-diesel model, and we ran that as a family car, and I was passionate about cars. I really wanted my dad to have a cool car, and all we had was a Ford Sierra Estate. When I grew up then got slightly bigger, Dad sold the business, or closed the business down with the recession in the late 80s, 1989, and sold the property, which enabled him to be able to buy just about on finance a Mercedes 300D F-Reg, smoke silver with a Duchalet rear spoiler, which meant huge amounts to me because we had a spoiler on a car, and ended up doing 285,000 miles, I think it was, on that. And that stayed with us pretty much until I left home. So I talk about cars that I really wanted. My dad had a Sierra, and that was terrible. I've got two stories really in this, which are pretty incredible, I think. There was a guy in the Valleys who had a company called JC Van Hire. His name was Jeff Churchill. He passed away now, but quite an incredible guy. Jeff bought not one, but two Ford RS200s. And he had one, which was a road car, which was hidden away and we never saw it. And the other one he campaigned in rallying. And he did, I think, the 1986 Fram Welsh Rally in it. Just as Group B got banned, you were able to run it on a clubman specification. And that, for me, was pretty much as cool as it got. I wanted Dad to buy a Ford RS200. And now they trade, I mean, Gerardo, is it, I think, has them for $500,000 or 300,000 or something along those lines. In those days, they couldn't sell them. Ford could not sell them. They had them lined up. Reliant built them, and they had them lined up, and Jeff went and bought two. I presume they were down with his lease company as a Ford Transit vans. And that, for me, was the pinnacle. My mates' dads were all rallying, and my dad wasn't rallying anymore, and I really wanted my dad to rally. That was what I really wanted. So a Ford RS200 is up there as being something quite incredible in my world, and one day I will own one. It's just the problem is probably not being able to use one as much as you'd want to. I think that's the problem with having a Ford RS200 now. The other story, which I think is pretty incredible, is that just as diesel was coming into the market, diesels were put into vans and lorries mainly back in the 80s. They weren't put into cars. But diesel was also a lot cheaper in the petrol stations. So you would pay, let's say it was £1 a litre or £1 a gallon probably in those days, you'd probably be able to get diesel for 85 pence. So there was a big margin that diesel was cheaper. But also, diesel wasn't easy to find, and the main petrol stations had expensive fuel, and then there were a few local people who were a bit cheaper. And there was a guy called Curly Humphreys, who is a entrepreneurial, should we put it, Welshman, and he had a chain of garages called Action petrol stations. And we used to queue up with our vans for the meat business. We used to queue up to go and get cheap diesel from his garages. And I'd go along for the ride as a young kid. This is probably mid-80s, probably 85, 87, something like that. And one day arrived and there was a red Ferrari Testarossa parked outside the petrol station, and the registration was ACT10N, so Action. And it was clearly Curly Humphreys' own Ferrari Testarossa with the registration Action on it. And for me, that was peak car. So growing up, Ford RS200s and Ferrari Testarossas were pretty much as good as it got. I had no interest in a poster with a Ferrari Testarossa. I had no interest in a white Lamborghini Countach on the wall. But seeing that car out in the Welsh Valleys, a Ferrari Testarossa with Action on the registration, I knew that one day I would need to get a red Ferrari. Whatever I needed to do, it needed to be a red Ferrari, and I needed to have a swanky plate on it as well. From a really young age, my father instilled a huge work ethic in me. Didn't have to be intelligent, you didn't have to be really bright, you just needed to work really, really hard. Every single penny I've got now, I've earned myself. So my dad at 15 sent me out to work at various jobs, amazing jobs, in mushroom farms, collecting mushroom compost, picking up golf balls at a driving range. I worked at a creamery, checking the tops were on the bottles correctly. So basically, my teen years were working, every summer holiday, working. So another influence in my life, I suppose, was my uncle, Uncle Martin, who is my mum's brother. He took over the family garage, which was a Morris garage down in the Welsh Valleys, Llantwit Major, or the Vale, the posh bit of Wales down in south. And we had a Morris garage there, which turned into a Toyota garage. And they were the first people to bring the Toyota franchise into Wales. So we were the first Toyota dealership in Wales. And my uncle grew that business, but it was a series of little terrace buildings knocked through in a very tight series of streets. And it wasn't a particularly great garage, but it sold a load of Toyotas because people traveled a long way to come and find the Toyota brand. Toyota, I would have historically said, was a bit like Hyundai is now, but actually Hyundai have gone and exceeded that. It was a very new, innovative brand back in the day when Toyota arrived in the UK, and we had the only dealership in Wales, which was very good for business. Anyway, my uncle grew the business and bought, in fact, my father's butcher's property in Bridgend and opened Bridgend Toyota, Williams Garage Bridgend, and that was our Toyota dealership, which my uncle ran, and that's where I got a job being a valeter several years later. So I was in a building outside the main garage, so nobody saw me all day. I was sat there cleaning cars, either part exchange cars or new cars that were going out. And I collected my money. I didn't go drinking, I didn't go smoking or anything like that. I just saved my money because I wanted to buy cars. And I was mega, mega proud to be able to afford to buy my first car, which was a part exchange that came into the garage for £675. And it was almost my dream come true. It wasn't an Audi Quattro, it was the Audi Coupe that looked like the Quattro. So the 2.2, 5-cylinder, front wheel drive, it was an A-Reg, and that was my first car. So I lived for my cars basically, and that I was the coolest thing in South Wales, driving around in my Audi Coupe. No one else thought I was cool, but I thought I was incredibly cool. After I left school, I carried on working at my uncle's garage in the summer holidays and the Christmas holidays. But I went off to university, to Reading University, and I worked to try and pay for my fees, my accommodation. I worked a bit at Ascot Racecourse in the kitchen, doing washing up and dishes and things, which was great because I'd earn £50 in a shift there, and that would pay for a tank of petrol in my Audi. So that was great. Anyway, I came home one holidays and my dad said, right, after you finish work tonight, you're going down to meet a High Court judge in Cardiff because I want you to be a lawyer. My dad was adamant I was going to leave university and do a conversion course to be a lawyer. So I went to meet a judge at the judge's lodgings in Cardiff. And in the middle of the meeting with the High Court judge, there was a knock on the door and a bit of commotion. And somebody had written off my Audi Coupe outside. The sun was in the person's eyes as they went up a hill, and they'd gone straight into the back of my Audi Coupe and gone and written it off. And I was absolutely mortified. I'd saved up my money, my £675, and they'd gone and written off my car. But actually, it was probably a blessing in disguise because from that point onwards, I learned how to chop and change cars. I thought my Audi would be kept forever, but actually I got a very handsome insurance payout, way more than the £675 that I'd expended on that car. And we went off car shopping and I kept chopping and changing quite quickly then. Bangers, all of them bangers. The first thing I did to replace my Audi Coupe was quite scary and funky in two different ways, really. It was a Belgium registered Audi 80, left-hand drive, quite one of the last of the very angular Audi 80s, and I brought it back from Essex on Belgian plates with probably no insurance and certainly no road tax, back down to the Welsh valleys, and I then tried to convert it to a British registered car, which is actually easier said than done. But my father was actually very helpful in that process, so we got it registered on a D plate, and I smoked around in a wonderful left-hand drive car, which actually I didn't realise a British registered left-hand drive car was probably worth a bit more than it was across in Belgium because people used them as a premium to go and take them to their holiday houses. So I sold that quite well, and then bought another part exchange of my uncle's, which was a D-plate MR2, which I really thought I was starting to make it then. So I had a MR2, the Mark 1 MR2, manual of course, 1600, and it was tremendous. And I used to start driving that properly like I'd stolen it, really. That was the stage of really enjoying cars. So the MR2 was absolutely a passion of mine. I loved it. And back in those days, this would be now about 97, 98, I suppose, I bought a Sony head unit. Everybody bought them. I used to buy Max Power, and there'd be pages of adverts there with stereo head units. And I saved my pennies. I sent off a form to buy a Sony head unit, and we put it in the MR2. The guys in the Toyota garage did it for me, my mates who I'd met in the Valting Bay. And we fitted it, and it was wonderful. And I moved to London for my first job, so I was in a council block in London living, and came home from work one night, and somebody had smashed up my MR2 and stolen my absolutely cherished Sony head unit. And this was something I couldn't live with, that somebody had broken into my pride and joy MR2, had damaged the locks, had taken the stereo, and it had to go. I just couldn't live with the fact that somebody had gone and smashed up my MR2. So the MR2 was sold, and I did okay in getting out of that again because I'd bought it well. And the secret of all car deals is buy things well and the sale will take care of itself. phoned my dad and said, Dad, the money's in the bank from the MR2. And he said, I've seen just the thing for you, son. I've seen an 8 Series for sale in the Western Mail, which is the Welsh paper down in South Wales. I've seen an 8 Series for sale and it's only $2,500. And I said, Dad, I've always wanted an 8 Series. And he said, right, I'll give you a call tonight. So Dad called up. He said, right, I've got it. It's wonderful. You'll love it. I'll bring it up and we'll swap over cars at Heston Services tonight, just outside London, and I'll give you the 8 Series. The 8 Series wasn't a BMW 8 Series. The 8 Series was a Rover 820 Ti, left-hand drive, Vitesse spec, but a 820 Ti, and it was Bolivian spec. And basically, it had come out of Rover in Birmingham and hadn't made it to Bolivia, and somehow made it to Cardiff docks when my dad bought it for $2,500. And I ended up in London with a 4-door saloon 800 Rover, which I did like. I did love the Rover 800 because I'm a bit sad like that, but it wasn't the BMW 8 Series that I really wanted. So I completed my course at university, which was in a thing called land management, which I thought it was about surveying and theodolites, but it turns out it was about property development and investment, which I didn't have a clue. That was the course I was going to do. And my friends at the end of the course said, right, where are you going to go now, Guy? Where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to go back to the valleys. I'm going to get on the train at Reading and head back down to Cardiff and maybe get a job in Cardiff, or maybe go and work at my uncle's Toyota garage and run that. And they said, well, get a job in London. We're all going to London. In fact, there's a bed spare in our council flat we're renting in Putney, and we'll go and come and move in with us. So I said, yeah, well, why not? So I went to London and got a job with a guy from Wales, which randomly met in an interview, and we hit it off straight away, and he gave me a job, and I started doing mad, crazy pieces of advice on planning and development for this Welsh guy. And then one day I got a phone call from my university saying, a developer in London, or a property owner in London, needs a person to go in as a young graduate and help them out. Didn't know, I'd never heard of the guy, that it was the richest man in Britain, the Duke of Westminster. And that was really, it didn't make much of a difference then, because I went in to work for him at the lowest of the low of the low, probably on £15,000 a year, which worked out net of tax, £990 a month. I remember it vividly. But that was the start of my career, starting to get some traction, starting to be able to get a loan from Lloyds Bank to pay for my cars, which meant I could go off and buy something a bit more exciting than my Rover 800. I knew straight away, when I started to earn a little bit more money, I had to be sensible. So I couldn't go off and buy the car of my dreams straight away. So I moved out of London in my lovely flat in Putney, which was an old council flat, and I moved to Slough, which people will know, I quite liked it, but it was affordable in terms of housing stock. So I bought a house for my sister in Slough, but there was one good thing about living in Slough, and that is that it had a garage, and I could have a secure place to park a car, and I could, once I'd bought a house and banked that money, I was able to buy my little 3-bedroom starter home in Slough. I could go off and buy a car. So I spent 6 months reading the brochure every time I sat on the toilet. I read the brochure for the Honda S2000. And at the age of 24, I went off and spent £24,000 on a one-owner but 3-month-old Honda S2000 in Monte Carlo blue with black interior. And I really had made it. Why did I want to buy a Honda S2000? For me, it was a number of things. The first thing was the engine revved to 9,300 revs. It was manual, it was 6-speed. 6-speed was really rare. And then a quirky little thing, which will make no difference to anybody now, but it had xenon lights. Xenon lights were what the police cars had. When you were on the motorway speeding and you saw somebody coming up behind you at night and it had xenon lights, it was clearly a police car. And I bought a car that had xenon lights. It was a geek's car. It was a complete nerd's car. I loved it. It wasn't an MX-5, which didn't have anything that technical going on with it, a good solid sports car. This was a geek's car that was absolutely the pinnacle of technology, in my opinion. So the S2000 was amazing. I lived in Slough. I drove every day into Mayfair, where I had a car park with my job. How the hell I blagged a car park in Mayfair. People didn't want to go in, and the congestion charge had been introduced. And I'd get in before 7 in the morning, and I'd leave after 6:30 when it finished. So I didn't pay congestion charge. I got into my Mayfair car park, and that was that. But I'd quite often stay home after work, stay in London after work and drive home. After seeing some friends. And one night I remember I met my old mate from school, and we didn't drink. We'd had no drinks, but we'd been out for dinner. And I was hooning down the M4 past Heston Services, where my father had handed over my Rover 800 to me. And I hit some water, standing water in the outside lane in the dark. And I span across 4 lanes of the M4 and stuffed it into the Armco barrier. And I remember opening my eyes and the front left-hand corner of the car disappeared. And I thought, let's get it off the hard shoulder, up onto the grass, because somebody else is going to come and do a stupid thing like I've just done. Called my dad and said, Dad, you know, I'm getting it recovered back home. And he said, son, we'll hide it. No one will ever know. And it was a bit of an embarrassment that I'd gone and spent all this money on a car. I was very young and I'd gone and crashed it. But my insurance wasn't very good because I was still running on my parents' insurance. There was no way at the age of 24 I could be affording something as special as a Honda S2000 and insure it. And to pay for it, I'd borrowed £22,000 off my father. So I put two grand of cash down, and I borrowed 22 grand off my dad, and that was at 7% a month. That's 7% annualized, but paid it on a monthly basis. With the crashed S2000, I had to repair it, and I wasn't going to get it through insurance. So I started looking in Auto Trader, the hard copy of Auto Trader in those days, at the breakers yards, and I found a damaged car in Glasgow, and we bought a front bumper. The bonnet miraculously hadn't been damaged. I bought a front left wing, and then through the owners club I bought a headlight and a ballast unit, and they were mega expensive because the ballast needed to give you that very high voltage to get the xenon light going. And my uncle with a Toyota garage booked it into his body shop for me, and we got it repaired. And it was a big lesson because I had to have the Rover 800 back for 3 months when I was having it repaired, because I think we hadn't quite sold it at that stage. And yeah, it was a big lesson to respect these cars and to take care. And also, I was probably punching a bit above my weight at 24, driving a £24,000 car I couldn't really afford. So I carried on driving it. I did a number of track days in it. We had really good fun. We used to do airfield track days back in those days at decommissioned Air Force bases. They were a bit cheaper. I think they were £99 a track day, so a bit cheaper. And I joined the S2000 Club, which I told you about, S2KI. I was on that forum, and it was the start of forums, technology, and it was a really cool club. And the S2000 was amazing. But I wanted to satisfy my hunger a bit more for fast cars. So my uncle had an amazing Toyota Supra Turbo, which he'd imported from America and turned it into a racing car. And he'd done a number of production saloon races over the years, and the will hire 24 hours in it. And I mithered or bothered my uncle for years trying to buy this car. And one day he said, it's available if you want to buy it. So I bought the Toyota Supra Turbo, which I still have, and that's another story. And I had to sell the Honda S2000 to be able to help pay for it. So I bought a Volvo V70 T5, which was a really cool car back in the day, an R-Edge 97 plate with 100,000 miles. I bought the Volvo, and then I had a track car as well. So I went from having this beautiful new Honda S2000 to having, you know, a fairly leggy Volvo and a very leggy Toyota Supra Turbo. Toyota Supra was road registered, which it so should not have been road registered. You know, it was roll cage, left-hand drive, dump valve, Group A side exhaust, running on massive AP brakes. And I remember I used to drive it into Mayfair, just park it in my garage, and I'd go around Westminster Square on the way home, and I'd drive it like I'd stolen it with a big whooshing from the dump valve. But that's the things we got away, I think, now in the 90s, which you would never be able to drive that around London now. You get pulled over straight away, and the police would be all over it. So had great fun with that Supra Turbo. I blew up the Supra Turbo at a track day in Bedford with this, like a Formula One, when a Formula One car blows up, smoke everywhere. I couldn't afford to repair it at the time. And in fact, my life had changed a bit because my employer had a new job working out of Liverpool, so spending half of my time in Liverpool, half of my time in London. I'd never been north of the Watford Gap. I had barely been out of Wales, so I was given a new job working in Liverpool. But I was able to stay in Slough and reverse commute effectively to Liverpool. Anyway, I met my wife, who's ex where I met her at work, effectively ex-Grosvenor, and we got married and we moved up north. And I needed a car for this wedding. And I thought, well, the Volvo is no good as a wedding car, and the Supra certainly is no good. Who's got a good car? Oh, my boss, the richest man in Britain, the Duke of Westminster, he's got a really nice Jaguar XJR. It was the older shape on an R plate, 97, 4-litre V8, supercharged in flat green with a red coach line and a special button to call the police or the armed forces in an emergency. And I thought that would be just the car that would be perfect for my wedding. So I approached his PA and I negotiated to buy his car for £7,000. He was due to get a new shape Range Rover, I think about the same time. So it was in the right place at the right time, and I bought this Jaguar XJR. Now, the problem with a chauffeur car, which I've now learnt, is that they never get thrashed. So the engines have had a time of ticking over at 2,500 revs and get driven steadily all the way through it. So on the night to my wedding, the night before my wedding, there was a rehearsal, and I was hooning up the M40 in my new XJR, which I was trying to push its boundaries, and the inside wheel arch lining blew out because of the speed I was going and decided to foul the front left wheel. So not only did I have to then try and repair the wheel liner, I also had to miss my rehearsal with my bride-to-be, and it didn't start a marriage in a very good footing where I turned up late, missed the rehearsal, had a partner-to-be or wife-to-be in tears, and a Jaguar that was limping along, and it was going to be taken on our honeymoon as well, which was the next day. So I'd certainly had a few difficulties with that XJR, let's say. So we went off down to the West Country, and I remember we enjoyed the honeymoon, apart from the journey back where somebody pulled out on me on the M5 and it pretty much tipped up on one wheel because the car was incredibly fast but didn't have a clue of how to handle itself. And I think they're probably around 400 brake or something ridiculous, and they haven't got the tyres. Certainly the Pirellis were terrible on them, and the suspension isn't built for doing clever things. So it made the honeymoon, but it had to go quite soon after the honeymoon because it was just going to kill me. My wife and I both sold our houses. I sold my house in Slough and she sold her house in Shrewsbury, where she lived. And we decided that we weren't going to go and buy another house because the market, it was around 2005 when everything was starting to overheat. And we decided to keep the money in cash. But of course, as a car nerd, I'd made a few quid now in the property market by selling my house, and my wife had as well. I had some money burning a hole in my pocket. So what would you go and do with that? Well, of course, you'd order a brand new Porsche. So I went to Man Island, the Porsche dealership in Liverpool, down on the Mersey, and I ordered the new, I think it was a 987 Boxster S. It hadn't come out. It was one of the first in the country. I ordered black, manual, and I ticked the box for delivery to Zuffenhausen to pick it up in Stuttgart, effectively, at the factory. We waited very little time, 3 months, I think, and it was available to go and pick it up, and it was going to come out. We were picking it up just before March the 1st in 2005, so it would be on the new plate. And we both thought we'd really made it then. We were flying out at the age of 28. I was 28, and we went and picked up our brand new Boxster S. I then realised very quickly, having a brand new car that cost 50 grand, that actually there was no debt. I'd used my savings for my house to go and buy this. It was quite limiting and quite scary having all your money in a car. So I sold the car fairly quickly, and then I started doing car dealing out of my house. So at the weekends, I started buying and selling little shopping cars and used the money from the Porsche to try and make some money. So it was a fairly quiet time in a way for cars. I had this nice history of Honda S2000 and the Porsche Boxster, and then I started buying reasonably sensible cars where I could make some money. The car dealing, I created a company called Small Car, and I specialised, and I had about 7 at any one time small cars. And at this point, we were renting a house. We didn't go and buy a house. We rented a farm. Effectively, I'd go to the auctions at Bellevue Car Auctions in Manchester, BCA Car Auctions, and I'd disappear off. I'd be at my desk at 7 in the morning in Liverpool. I'd disappear off at about 10, and I'd shoot across to Manchester, and I'd go and buy a handful of cars. And I would personally drive everyone back down to where I live, where I had them for sale on a Friday evening and a Saturday morning. And I set up a car dealership, and I sold nothing for the first 3 or 4 months. I had 7 cars, and I didn't sell a single car. And I thought, this is really quite stressful, having your own business all of a sudden. I was doing my day job, working in my property company, but I was also selling cars at the weekends. Anyway, I came to Easter and I thought I really need to do something to sell these cars, and then the market took off and I sold 75 cars in about a year then, from that point onwards, from the farm at weekends, which was phenomenal. And then I started to be able to buy slightly better cars, so my Corsas and my Fabias, I could then slowly get one car that was nice. So I bought a Honda Civic Type R in black, and bought it as a 3-year-old ex-lease car. And then I bought another one of those, and then I started to get quite interesting part exchanges. Nothing terribly exciting that's worth talking about here, but I had some nice cars as they came through. My dream car growing up, one of my dream cars that one of my father's friends had, was a SL 500, or the SL 320 he had, so the R129 from 1989 onwards, and I was able to buy a SL 500 with the AMG wheels, and I was really chuffed about that. That was a dealer's car. That was one of my cars that I dealt, but it was probably the nicest car I had in that period. But it was really good fun buying and selling cars, and I just loved meeting the people and doing the deals and making a bit of cash. So I would spend hours looking at the auction list. Every night I would look at the auction list and see if things, and I'd know, before I went to the auction, I'd know there were 10 or 15 cars that I really wanted to buy that were coming out. And I rocked up the auction one day and I had my 10 cars, and they were okay, but they weren't great. I saw this green, and green was like the worst car you could ever have, automatic, and no one wanted automatics, Golf Estate, that was a grey import. So somebody had imported it from Germany because they were cheaper in those days. Grey import, green automatic, Golf Estate. But there was something about it that I needed to buy this car. And I think it was booked at 3,750 or something, and it went down on the hammer at 3. I bought it, and I brought it home, put it on Auto Trader, and within 12 hours I had sold it for 5 grand. And that was the best deal I've ever done. And I remember that green Golf Estate to this day, because I've never made, that much money in such short a time. And it was, one of those things. Deals are where you least expect them. One of the cars I sold in my car dealer's time was a 3-month-old ex-hire Golf TDI, 1.9, 105 brake, loved it, and sold it, found it for a client who was a lawyer in London. I used to do a bit of car sourcing as well, so I found this Golf for a highfalutin lawyer in London, and he took it down to London. And he phoned me up one day and he said, Guy, I've got a problem. My wife wrote it off at the weekend. I said, well, how did she write it off? Oh, the front wheel got knocked by a taxi, and well, I'm going to send it off, and it's going to go and be repaired. They've done a temporary repair, but it's back on the road, but we need to find another car. I said, fine, I'll find you another car. What do you want? And he wanted, I think, a Q5 or a Q7 or something. In the period it was off being repaired, somebody rear-ended it and wrote it off again. So it got written off twice. And he phoned me and said, Guy, we really need a car because it's been written off before it's been repaired. So we've had it written off twice now. Can we have the car? And I got him a car, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, can I buy it off the insurance company? So I bought a 18-month-old drivable TDI Golf for £1,500 for the insurance company, and that became my daily car. That's the car I drove in and out of Liverpool or Manchester or wherever I was working at the time, and I used it. I drove it within an inch of its life, and it was incredible, and it still lives today. My dad had it after I had it, and now the guy who runs my rally car team, he uses it himself. I gave it to him. I think I sold it to my dad for even more money than I paid for it off the insurance company, so we did quite well there. But effectively, a Golf GT DDI, no, it wasn't a GT, a TDI Golf is indestructible in my opinion. And later on in my life, I came back to Golfs because I just think they're great. But then at the end of 2006, children arrived. And my life changed. I needed to get a sensible family car. Don't you? You get married, you have kids, you need a sensible family car. I can't have a Civic Type R as a family car. So I went down to British car auctions in Birmingham. I went to the BP fleet sale and I bought an Audi Avant, A6 Avant, 2.5 TDI Quattro, black, loaded to the spec with sat nav and a sunroof and everything else. And I brought it home and we were ready for children. We were ready. We had the family car. and it was the worst car I've ever bought. Heavy steering, no go in it. It cost me way too much. The first service at Audi was about £1,500, and I thought, you know what, we've made a mistake here. Kid had arrived, we didn't need the Audi A6 estate, we just needed something that fitted the three of us in and a bit of junk, but also we needed something a bit fun. So the Audi went very quickly, and we bought, and I'm really chuffed about this, a Subaru Forester Turbo. It was a top of the range, I think it's XTD or something like that. It was a really good specification, leather, full-length sunroof, and it was an ex-tractor salesman, so it had been maintained really well. It had 89,000 miles, and we used and used and used. We towed horse trailers with it, we towed normal trailers. I used to go off watching rallies in it, and we had a great time with it, and it did about another 100,000 miles without needing a new engine. They were known for eating clutches and engines, but this one was really good. So family, if you're gonna have a family, don't go and do what I did, and don't go and buy a family car because you don't really need it. The first kid arrived in 2006, we all got sensible, and then the next one arrived in 2008, but the world had changed. I mean, we all know we went into the global recession at this point, and I was in property. Was my job safe? Was I going to keep my job? It was paying enough to have some nice cars, but I never overstretched myself. I never borrowed money, and I never bought a car that was depreciating. I always bought things that didn't really depreciate, so I could get out of a car without losing much. The A6 I lost a little bit on, but generally I wasn't losing money on cars. And then the recession came and the bottom fell out of the car market. It was really quite incredible. And I would work in London 2 or 3 days a week in Mayfair, and I'd work 2 or 3 days a week in Liverpool. And I used to walk past Berkeley Square where Cadbury's and Green and Blacks were based, and the chocolate company, if you don't know it. And there was a amazing BMW 760 Li in dark green with a tan leather. And I used to see it and think, that is peak chauffeur car. If I were ever going to have a chauffeur, that is the car I would have. And I just thought it was amazing, and the floor had fallen out of cars, and I was looking at British car auctions one day and I saw this 760 had come off lease and it was going through the car auctions, and I was like, I've got to have this. And I was in a board meeting down in Cambridge at the time when the auction was going through, so I couldn't phone in and bid or anything, so I had to put a commission bid in. So this car was 105 grand new, and 3 years later, I bid 21 grand to try and buy it. And somebody, a car dealer from Lytham St Anne's, turns out bought it for 21 and a half. And he put it up for sale in the Times at 24,500. And I was like, well, I can't pay 24 and a half grand because I know it just went for 21 and a half. That's what it's worth. So I watched it, and in the Times, the Sunday Times, every Sunday, the advert for that car kept coming in. It was going down and down and down. And I was coming past Lytham St Anne's about 2 or 3 months later, and I phoned the guy and I went and looked at it, and I bid him 21 and a half grand, and I bought a BMW 760 Li with 30,000 miles, every single extra, Alcantara ceiling, it had the TVs front and back. It was an amazing bit of kit. And I bought that, and that was my family car then for the next 2 years. And my kids, who were very small, were in their reclined long wheelbase seats. We used to store bags in the footwell in the back. So if the boot was full with all pushchairs and everything else, we used to store bags behind the driver's seats and in front of their feet because their feet weren't in the footwell. And we lived like lords. When we sold it, it had milk on the ceilings. On the Alcantara, it had dried milk on the ceiling where their bottles had gone up and hit the ceiling. But I doubt many people have had a BMW 760, which is the Rolls-Royce V12, or the same basis of that Rolls-Royce V12 engine, I think, that went in the Phantom. Not many people have had those as a family car, I suspect. The BMW was sold because I was just scared that something was going to happen. I dinged the active anti-roll bar underneath at Thruxton when I was going to watch some racing once, and that was a horrendous cost to get that repaired. We just heated it up in the end and bent it back, so it didn't cost us 2.5 grand. It cost us 20 quid to my mates. We got rid of the 760 before it started costing money. And then I decided that I didn't really want a Morgan, but what I heard in the press is that Morgans, which had 10-year waiting lists, were available to order. You could order and have a Morgan within, weeks, basically, because there was no waiting list for Morgans anymore. And I thought, I'm never going to get a chance to have a brand new Morgan ever in my life. Now is the chance. And also, the Chancellor reduced VAT to 15%. So I bought a new Morgan. I think it was like 25 grand for a brand new 4.4 Sport, all black wire wheels, 1.6 Ford Focus engine, manual, 5-speed, great car. Ordered it from Southport, from Lifes of Southport, a very small Morgan dealer. Arrived and I had it for 18 months and I drove it like I stole it for 18 months. I went to Milan in it, I went to the Alps, I went to Le Mans Classic in it, and it was incredible. It did about 40 to the gallon, 42 to the gallon, driving it like I'd stolen it, and it was really good fun. But it was a bit scary in that I spun it on the way to work one morning on the dual carriageway on the way into Liverpool. I thought, it's got to go. So I got rid of it very quickly. And then the recession pricing was still with us. So I was able to buy in 2010, or 2010 registered in 2011, Lotus Evora. So the bright orange colour, one owner, a doctor in London, had bought it. It had depreciated from, let's say, they were 45, 50 grand or something. It was 30 grand. It was 1 year old. It did no mileage. And I had 2 little girls that I could put in the back of the car because it was a 4-seater. And I convinced my wife that it was a family car for me. And I ran a Lotus Evora again for 12 months. And I had nothing but praise for the Lotus dealers network. I took it into Christopher Neal, which is a Lotus dealer up in the northwest, and they said, oh great, yeah, we'll sort everything that's warranty related out. And it came back like a new car. The air conditioning was sorted out, all the little niggles, which weren't a niggle, I didn't even spot them, but they spotted all these little niggles and sorted it out, and I had a great time for 18 months with that Lotus Evora. The next few cars really hark back to my childhood a little bit, and that my first car was a Bedford pickup truck, and I always wanted a pickup truck, and there's this thing here is a pickup truck, and I always wanted a pickup truck. And I saw for sale on eBay a Mazda B2000 pickup truck with a Rover V8, and I thought, well, why not? Let's go and do it. So I went down to Birmingham to go and look at it. It wasn't running, and I should have known that. That was a red flag straight away. It wasn't running, but I bought it because you buy things on eBay when you're a bit stupid. Bought it, and I spent the next 2 years trying to get it running, and we got it running, but I'd thrown so much money at it. And it was a bit quirky. It had an XR3i interior. The Rover V8 was a manual, so when it ran really well, but it was just a disaster. And I'd spent so much money on it, I just gave it to a friend and said, I can't bear to sell it. I'm in so deep in this car. If I give it to you, I'm not losing that money I've spent on it. So my mate down the road, John, has a Mazda B2000 pickup with a V8 engine still, and it's a rolling restoration project. And really, I still own it, but the less said about that, the better, really. So the economy was quite interesting at this point because the recession we'd started to recover from the recession in 2007, 8, 9, but the Northwest, Liverpool especially, in the property market wasn't going anywhere. And I knew I couldn't go spending money on cars and losing money. So I was buying cars where I could buy, enjoy them and not lose any money. And the one car which I always wanted as a kid, when my dad had his Merc 300D, I always wanted a 320 convertible. And I finally bought one with 180,000 miles on. And the hype, you know, people sell them now for the Sportline for 30 grand or whatever. The hype didn't live up at all to the reality. And having had a few sports cars, I bought it and it was a saggy old thing, and it sort of ruined the fantasy of that. And I'd love an E500 of the same vintage, but you know, those are all history for me. But my career was slowly improving. I was spending a bit more time in London. I was having to stay overnight in London a lot more, but I was also earning bonuses started to come back into the property industry. So I'd save on bonuses, and we slowly had a little bit more money. And then one day, a guy, one of my consultants, phoned me, and he knew I loved cars and he had nice cars. And he had a RS6, the V10 RS6. And he said, Guy, it's a company car. It was at Knight Frank, which is a property agent's. It was a director's car, so he had that as a company car in their LLP, where he could have a pretty funky company car. So it'd been maintained within an inch of its life. And I bought a RS6 V10, which was nutty. And my folks have got a holiday house down in West Wales now, in a caravan down there. And I used to go down with the kids to go to West Wales, and I was just driving it like I'd stolen it because it was so fast. It's bendy, switchback hairpins, and I was overtaking cars I just shouldn't be overtaking. So I decided at that point, you know, buying a very fast family car was a pretty stupid thing to do, and sold the RS6. And I think I sold the winter tyres, I remember, that went with it, to the same man who installed a carpet for free. So I still was doing my deals and enjoyed doing my dealing, but an RS6 was just too fast for me. So as the economy recovered slowly in 2012, 13, 14, I started to get a hunger to go and do this for myself, try and go do property development myself. which is nigh on impossible because I had no money really. You know, I didn't have any money, and the money I did have was in a few cars and very little else. So I worked very hard with connections, and we got some backers, and eventually at the end of 2014, after 16 years in working in London for the Duke of Westminster's company, I managed to leave the company and went and set up my own business, and really I haven't looked back since then. But what it meant was all of a sudden we'd done a lot of work in the background. All of a sudden I had a bit more money to play with because we'd done a very good deal and pulled off our first property development before I left my company. And I wanted to buy some cars. So I was able now to buy a car that perhaps would lose a little bit of money rather than just maintaining the status quo. And a car I'd looked at for years and years and years was a Alfa SZ. People either hate them because they think they're ugly as sin, or they love them because they think they're beautiful. And I was in the love them, think they're beautiful, and I absolutely think they are the most stunning thing. And my friend and I bought from blind at auction, bought this SZ, and it was an impossible disaster. We had problems with suspension, we had problems with the engine, we had problems with this, we had problems with that. And it went off to a SZ expert who basically rebuilt it over 6 months. And he was wonderful, he knew his stuff. And we enjoyed driving it, but it was a car to look at. It wasn't a car to drive. The front end, it had front lift on it, which was quite an early innovation for those cars. But on the road, it just kept grounding around here on these country A roads. It just grounded the front road and the front lip on the road. And it went, and I sold it to a nice car dealer down in the Cotswolds, and he had an early Range Rover 5-door manual V8 for sale, and I said, why don't we swap a bit of it? You know, I think we sold the SZ for 50 grand, and he had this Range Rover for 15, so I part X'd the Range Rover. I didn't need a Range Rover. I had one or two already, so I do not need a Range Rover. So I ended up with a Mark I Range Rover manual on a choke, and it was a complete nightmare. And you know, beautiful thing to look at, like the SZ, but I bought it with my heart, not my head. So in my last few months at working in London, I was still trying to be clever with money or not spend money on cars. And I wanted a car for the summer, which was going to not lose any money, but be a bit of fun. And I looked at the H&H classic car auction catalogue in Duxford, and I found this Bentley Continental R, which, you know, is a millionaire's car from the 90s, but now in the noughties, or the late noughties, early 10s, I suppose. It was basically a money pit. And I found this car. It was on the registration 2EEC, and it was dark red, cream leather. You'll find it in the catalogue still at the H&H auction. And I remember leaving my office, nipping out the back door of the office and bidding, and I bid 30 or 29 grand, I think it was, for a amazing, stunning Bentley Continental R with 2EEC on the plate, a proper stunning bit of kit. And I ran it for a year. I ran it into the first year of having my new business, and I used to drive in and out of in Manchester, Liverpool, and drive it around a lot, and it was faultless. And it was a 6.75 twin turbo, and really sets up for something else, which I bought later in my car career. But what a great car! And I sold it, I think, for 32 grand. The only regret I had about that is I left 2EEC on the car, and I see that now smoking around on an Audi, I think it is. So I should have just kept the plate and probably got the 32 grand for it anyway without the plate, but you live and you learn. Houses is quite an interesting thing, and when I lived in London, I rented in this council house in Putney. Then I moved out to Slough and bought a house for my sister, and that made us a lot of money because the market was going crazy. Then it was only a cheap house. I think we paid 150,000 for it, and we made, I think, nigh on 50, 60, 70 grand back in 2004. So we did really well on that. And then we put the money in the bank. My wife and I, she sold her house, I sold my house. We put the money in the bank, and we didn't go and buy a house when we got married because the economy was crazy. 2005, 6, 7. Then led up to the recession, and we made the right decision not to go and buy a house at the top of the market. So where do we go and live? Where do you find to go and live? And I looked on a map halfway between where I was spending most of my time, where my wife was spending most of her time, and we found somewhere, and we happened to go for dinner at a friend's house there around in that location, and they said, we rent this place off a country estate. And I said, what do you mean rent? It was a big house with grade 2 listed and fields and stables and sheds, car sheds. And they said, oh, we're moving out at Christmas. Do you want to move in? So we moved in to this amazing, at the age of 28, moved into this amazing 5-bedroom house with 10 acres, stables, the whole lot, and a big car shed. And it was a temporary thing. We did it for 6 to 12 months whilst the market subsided and we were able to go and find our dream house as a new married couple. 18 years later, I'm still renting the same house. And it makes no sense at all for us to have gone and bought it at a very young age, have the maintenance and upkeep of buying that house. So we've rented this house, still here, as I said, 18 years. It's got stables, it's got fields, it's got an allotment to grow vegetables. We're sitting in my car shed, which will fit in, well, it depends what you put in here, but it'll fit in 5 cars generally and a few motorbikes. And we're renting off a landlord who comes and repairs when a tile comes off the roof or the boiler needs repairing. So renting at the right level shouldn't be discounted. And I invest in property through my day job, but it makes no sense at all me going and buying a big multi-million pound farm or something, because your return on that money is very minimal compared to if I go and invest it in my company. So I've chosen to go and invest it, first of all, in buy-to-lets. We bought lots of buy-to-lets in local towns and cities. And then we sold those slowly and we've gone and invested it in my property company. So I think one of the interesting things as you get a bit older, and perhaps got a bit more money as well, is that as a kid I saw that Testarossa in the valleys and craved to have the red Ferrari, and that's absolutely what I had to do, was tick that box. But actually, as you experience those things, you realise probably they're not the nirvana anyway. They're too fast, they're too ostentatious, they perhaps can be a bit of the wrong statement to make. You can't turn up and go to a meeting in one particularly easily. And I've started to look at different vehicles to enjoy and tick the boxes of those. Now I've done the fast supercar thing, and hence the Astons and more classic cars. And actually, the problem with the new supercars and everything else and ticking those boxes is they are massively depreciating assets. I lost a ruckload of cash on my car, my supercar. And now my aim is to go and enjoy and grow a small collection of classics, but actually they're not depreciating. As long as you maintain them and you use them and you cherish them, they won't be depreciating. Whereas the supercars, the latest, greatest thing that everybody wants is a depreciating asset. I know people will say, oh, you go and buy a Pista or something, you'll make money, but you can't go and buy a Pista, you can't go and buy a GT3. The only people who can buy them have already gone and lost a shed load on a Cayenne or something else to get hold of that GT3. So actually, whilst there are appreciating assets in some instances, very few people can go and get them. So I'm starting to gravitate towards more classic cars because I think it's a sensible financial decision, but also I want to tick a different box. The one thing I think that is really interesting is the cars that got away. And I've got a list as long as my arm that are the cars I haven't bought that I really should have bought or wish I'd bought. It stretches all the way back to 1993, 4, 5, when I used to read Auto Trader. I used to buy South Wales Auto Trader every single week. And Cosworths were £3,000. And I was lucky enough to have a trader's policy, a motor trader's policy, and I used to have no problem insuring a Ford Sierra Cosworth. And buying an M3, an E30 M3 for £5,000 was possible. And I look at those now and go, why the hell didn't I do it? And I was at the time in my MR2, or I was in my Rover 800, or I was in my S2000, and I should have gone and bought a slightly older car, but I didn't because I was worried about maintenance costs. I was worried about it getting nicked. Even though it was insured, I was worried about it getting nicked. And there are a number of cars going forward which I also regret not buying. The next thing at the same time was really pucker Porsche 928s. I've never bought a Porsche 928 and I probably never will now. But when I was a kid at university, 928s were for nothing. They were for buttons. And they were reasonably reliable, big V8s. And I think a Porsche 928 at the time would have been a really good buy. And again, for not a lot of money. I was scared about maintenance costs, but now I've learned about these things. You can actually maintain them fairly economically, and I regret not buying a 928 GTS, let's say. And then moving forward another 10, 15 years, the one car which I really want is a Mercedes SLS with the gull-wing doors. And those came down to about 95, 97 grand. I think they were 180 when they were new. And I regret not buying an SLS. And I've always, when I've plucked up the courage to go and buy one, they've always just sprung on 20 grand. And I think they're up there now. And again, I see some really nice low mileage examples with nice specs coming through. And I just haven't got the balls to go and buy one. But an SLS, I might buy an SLS one day. I think they are a really special car, but I haven't quite got the balls to go and do one yet. So I set up the business at the start of 2015 and left my old employer. And I thought, right, this is a new world. We've made a bit of money now with our first property development. I can have a dream car. And I'd been building a list, as we all do in my head, for a long time. And my list was pretty much an R8 or a Nissan GTR. But I didn't want to buy secondhand because I was worried that they'd been ragged within an inch of their life. So I went on Auto Trader and I found a brand new Nissan GTR down at Oxford Nissan, and I got 15 grand off list, and that's unbelievable now. I bought a brand new Nissan GTR in 2015 for, I think it was 65 grand. And it was an incredible thing for a real step up from my last new cars in terms of where I was able to afford. And my daughter and I jumped on the train down to Oxford and we picked up the Nissan GTR, and I thought, hell's bells, I've gone and done it. I've really managed to buy this, an incredible car. And I had a wonderful time. I did go and get a remap with Litchfield because that's what every Barry race boy does. And I went and did that, and I put a Trick straight through exhaust on it, which was hand built by a guy locally to us. And it was incredible, a really, really incredible car. And I don't think I've probably, A to B, there's not a better car I've ever had. I was driving home after Storm Doris, I think it was, in February 2017, and the road was closed. I used a back road, and a lady didn't stop for a crossroads. I had priority, she didn't, and she hit me and wrote the GTR off. But as with all these things, it was a blessing in disguise. I wasn't hurt, the airbags weren't deployed, and I got a very large payout. Because I'd done so well at buying the car in the first place, then it hadn't depreciated very much, and I got a very good payout, and we were able to go again. And I then went and bought the Audi R8. So I bought an Audi R8 V10 Roadster from, I think it was HRO in Cheltenham, and it was trade-in they had against an Aston Martin, and I was able to go and buy that, and it was an incredible car. So I had both the Nissan GTR, which was brand new, and then a second-hand Audi R8 V10, which was a completely different car. Two were incomparable. The Nissan GTR was just a tool for getting from A to B as quickly as possible, and the R8 was just visceral. It was oral. It was just amazing, an amazing experience, and it made great noises and went very fast. The business was going well, but I never felt I would ever earn a red Ferrari. But a red Ferrari was up there for me. And I'd put it off over the years. There were various times I could have bought a Ferrari 456 or a 550, but it wasn't the red Ferrari I sort of wanted. I wanted the pinnacle, the best I could buy at that specific time. And I had the Audi R8, which was amazing, and a friend of mine had a relationship with a dealer, HRO, in London. And the dealer said, "Oh, you want a Ferrari one day, do you, Guy?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's up there or out there. I'll never be able to do it because it's just too aspirational for me." And there was a real psychological thing going on here as well. I didn't feel I deserved it. And I also worried that if I go and buy a red Ferrari, what do I buy after that? You've gone and done the absolute pinnacle. What do you do after that? So they were very clever, HRO, in what is now Berkeley Square, but they were down in South Ken, I think, at the time. They invited me to go and drive GTC4 Lusso in Italy. So they flew us out there. We had 2 nights in a hotel, and we did ice driving in a GTC4 Lusso, because that's what I wanted. I wanted the FF. The FF I adored. The GTC4 Lusso had come out to replace that, and it was really a GTC4 Lusso I could take the family off in, and that's the car I wanted. I came back from Italy, and I knew that the GTC4 Lusso wasn't going to scratch the itch. So I phoned up the dealer and said, "What about an F12? And he said, "Guy, we've got the perfect one here for you, red with cream. We've had it in a couple of times and sold it, very low mileage. It's got some of its remaining 7-year service pack with it. It comes with a 2-year Ferrari warranty." I thought, where can I possibly go wrong? So I asked what he would pay me for my R8, and we did a deal. I felt it was fair. It was a huge amount of money. I'm quite happy to say what it was. It was £195,000. And this is like way more than I'd paid for a car before. I think the R8 was probably 112 maybe, and the GTR was 65. But so it was a huge amount of money. And I went down. I remember I picked it up on the 1st of March because it was the new registration date. So I didn't really figure this out, but I turned up at South Ken or whatever it was, the dealer, and everybody else was picking up their brand new newly registered cars, and I was picking up my 3 or 4 year old F12, but it was a bit, felt a bit second class citizen, but it was wonderful. And I jumped in it outside the garage and I put it into drive and I couldn't move the bloody thing. And I felt a complete prat. So in the Audi, you put it into drive and it creeps off and it goes, and in the Ferrari, it doesn't move. You've got to actually put your foot on the accelerator and get it to move. So it was quite a nervous first few hours with the car. And I brought it home back up to where I live in Cheshire. And it was my dream come true. I had a red Ferrari with cream leather, which I then drove into the office pretty much every day. I had a daily, which was a Skoda Superb I used when it was really wet and mucky, but I tried to use the Ferrari very much as my everyday car. I had the F12, which was my dream come true, the red Ferrari, but I had a massive itch for either a Rolls-Royce Phantom or a Bentley Brooklands. I think Bentley Brooklands are the most beautiful car ever made. And both, the Phantoms were coming down in value, but I quite fancied the Coupe, which was staying up in value. And then the Bentley Brooklands were all over the place. Most of them were around 125 grand. Marlow Cars, you might have known them, always had 2 or 3 for sale at 125. And it seemed to be the market wasn't moving. And then one day, one came up on Auto Trader for, I think it was 97,000 down in Essex. And it was my perfect specification. It was British Racing Green with a saddle type leather. And I thought, right, I've got to go for it. It also had the dustbin lid wheels. So I phoned the guy up. We did a deal very, very quickly. I think we agreed at, I think it might have been 105 grand advertised, and we agreed at 92 and a half. And I was then the owner of a Bentley Brooklands, which I could not believe. I mean, the Ferrari was one thing, but to have a Ferrari F12 and a Bentley Brooklands in your same garage was pretty much as good as it gets. So that was, for me, that was peak modern car, really. So the Bentley was quite an interesting car because I'm always scared about spending money on cars. I don't mind spending a lot on a car, but I don't want to then have constant bills. And the service pack on the Ferrari was real peace of mind. I think I had 2 free services. So this Bentley Brooklands had been into P&A wood and had around £17,000 spent on it in maintenance. It had had everything from the TPMS, the tyre pressure monitoring system, sensors in every new tyre, through to the whole of the front end repainted at P&A wood, along with a load of other mechanical stuff. I think the steering rack had been replaced as well. And I just thought that was amazing, that to see a bill of £17,000 on a car that I think I was paying 90 grand for, it was absolutely bonkers. And I generally keep cars for not so long that I have to have them serviced. I try and buy them when they've just been serviced, enjoy them, put a load of miles on them, and try and sell them before they go in for a service. So the Bentley was exactly that. I had it not long enough to have to sell it on effectively without a service. And it was the first time I tried collecting cars. So if you want to go and look at that car advert is up for sale, or was up for sale on collecting cars, and I had a good experience with that. My father was a rally driver, my mum was a rally driver, my uncle was a racing driver. Pretty much what I wanted to do was go rallying and racing, but I knew I couldn't afford to do it. I couldn't afford to have the cool cars, couldn't afford to live in the place I do, and I couldn't afford to go rallying or racing. But I realized that time was ticking on. If I wasn't careful, I was going to be too old to go rallying and racing. So just before I started my own business, I knew that was heading down the line and that I would have a bit more financial independence. I spoke to a chap locally to where I live who runs rally cars, and we did a deal for me to do 4 rallies building up to driving in the Wales Rally GB, which is the round of the World Rally Championship. And in 2014, I think it was, I was able to go and do that. So the first ever rally was in a Mazda 2, which is that tiny little Fiesta-sized shopping car. And I spun on pretty much the 4th bend and nearly sort of crashed it. And then I built up confidence. We did more and more rallies and did the Wales Rally GB at the end of that year. Then I had my own business. I had a little bit more disposable cash, and I committed to another season. And then I committed to a really big season, which ended in me buying a car and doing the international round of the Wales Rally GB. So we started on the same start line as all the main World Rally Championship drivers at the very, very bottom. You know, I am crap, but it allowed me to be able to go and do exactly the same stages over 3 days, plus 3 days of recceing with the top drivers. And I bought a Ford Fiesta that was an ST, just a basic ST, but it was prepared by Malcolm Wilson's rally preparation company, M Sport, and it was an ex-works car effectively, and I ran that and did the Wales Rally GB that year. So I did 2 rounds with the international and 2 of the national rally, quite different rallies. But I also managed to roll it, and in 1 year, and within a few weeks actually, I managed to write off my Nissan GTR in that accident. I managed to be T-boned by a lorry on the M6 in my Golf GTD that I had as a daily beater, and I managed to roll my rally car all within a few weeks of each other. So I had a very unfortunate experience within a few weeks of each other. So I'm still doing loads of rallying, and actually I've started racing as well. So some of you might know about the Citroën C1 Challenge, which is a challenge where a grid of around 50 very standard basic Citroën C1s, 1 litre 3-pot Citroën C1s, tear around Snetterton or Alton Park or Anglesey or Pembrey or whichever track, a lot of races. And I team up with a couple of friends, and we all go and have a lads weekend away and go racing a few times a year. But also engaged in a really interesting new championship called the Rally Mini Challenge. And that is effectively, we buy a 2003-2004 Mini Cooper, and we prepare it with roll cage and bucket seats and safety equipment, and then we go rallying, and there's a championship. And just last Sunday I was rallying near Blackpool, and there were 14 of us competing all against each other, and between second and fourth place over an hour rallying there was about 15 seconds between us, and so it's very, very competitive. I finished 4th out of the 14 minis that competed, and I'm sitting 4th I think in the championship at the moment. Next year we have bought a Mini Cooper S, which we're preparing, the R53 Mini Cooper S, and we're going to be competing both with the Coopers and the Cooper S's. So a bit of a plug, if anybody wants to come and join the championship, there's a Facebook page, and it'd be great to have you all joining the Rally Championship. So I decided I need a refresh of my cars, and the Brooklands was going to start costing money. So I decided to get rid of that, and we sold it on Collecting Cars. And then the Ferrari I had for 3 years, and I thought, well, it's really good. I owned them outright, and I just fancied a change. It did nothing wrong. It was driving better than ever because it was on these really good tyres that I put on it, which I didn't put on it when James tested the car, first of all. And I was loving it, but I just wanted to change, and it all coincided. James called me at the right time, and I was thinking about getting rid of it, and a deal was done. And then I had money burning the hole in my pocket, but I went to look at an Aventador S, which I can't believe now in hindsight. I did go and do that, but I actually took my wife, which was probably the more scary bit, that this is what I was looking at buying, was an Aventador S, and she thought I was crazy. And then I went completely to the other scale and decided I want to get a classic car or two. So I got in touch with a friend who had a Aston Martin V8 from the 80s, asked him for some advice, and he said, why don't you buy mine? And he said, I'll do you a fair deal, but we'll need to get it recommissioned. I said, what do you mean recommissioned? He said, well, we haven't driven it for 11 years. I said, well, tell you what, I'll just take it as seen. So I bought this for a very fair price, put it on the back of a trailer, didn't start it, and took it to my rally man, who was more used to doing Mark II Escorts than very expensive Aston Martin V8s. And he said, actually, it's very similar technology to a Mark II Escort. So he had it for 3 weeks. We recommissioned it. He only charged me, I'm embarrassed to say, £800 in labour, and I think £100 in materials. I bought the oil and everything else, and I've done about 3,000 miles in it now, and it's proved to be really reliable. And they hadn't moved a wheel for 11 years, and now I've done probably 3,000 miles. So really enjoying the Aston Martin V8. It's a very, very different beast to the next car I bought, which is probably a love it or hate it car, which is the Aston Martin Virage Volante. Again, similar colour scheme, green with tan leather. And I just wanted to have a convertible. I've always had a convertible, and I thought, why not go and get an Aston Martin convertible? The problem is, I suspect I'll find it easy to sell the V8 when the time comes, but I'll probably find it very difficult to sell the Virage Volante. I bought it from the Aston Workshop up in the northeast, and they'd had it for 2 years for sale, but it is pretty much the cheapest example, and a good condition, but high mileage example with a good history. And I'm using my cars. One I use on sunny days, the other time I use them to go to car meets or just go for a run to the pub or something. But the other car that probably will beg a few questions is this thing behind me, and this is bonkers. This is absolutely bonkers. It's a 6.2 V8 supercharged Dodge Ram TRX. It is producing just over 700 brake horsepower, and it came about because I needed a car to tow my rally car. My guy who does the rally cars was sort of half retiring and wasn't going to take my cars to the events going forward, or was going to be more difficult. So I needed a tow car, and you need an interesting tow car. So I ordered and bought a new 2020 Dodge Ram Limited, which is the 5.7 hybrid. And when I was picking it up, a TRX was in the dealership from 51st State Autos down in London. And I said, oh, I'll come back for one of those one day. And then I decided to order one. So black with black. It's a phenomenally expensive, gutsy bit of kit. It does about 12 to the gallon towing and about 14 and a half to the gallon just tootling around. But it's a really enjoyable bit of kit, and I have good fun. And it's completely stock. I haven't tuned it, haven't put an exhaust on it, and I really enjoy driving it. I don't forget my roots with Toyotas, the family-owned Toyota dealerships. And I had the Toyota Supra, if you remember, a long time ago, and it blew up the turbo at Bedford, and then sold it to a racing driver who then campaigned it in the historic touring car championship for several years. And I knew he had the car, and I had a bit more money. I could actually afford it and run it properly. So I gave him a call, and a deal was done. And in fact, I bought 2 Toyotas from him. I bought my Supra back, and I also bought a very low owner 1981 Toyota Celica 2000 GT, which is the lift back version. So I converted the Celica to a rally car to do the Land's End John O'Groats rally in December 19, I think it was, with the Hero Championship, which was a phenomenal rally. And then I've turned the Supra racing car into a historic rally car as well. And it's not allowed, turbo cars are not allowed over a certain capacity in rallying. But because this car was homologated in period to run in the Safari Rally, I've been able to get it homologated and get it rallying. So we're hoping to get out for our first rally in December, all things being equal. So where does it go from here? I sit back and I was down in London last week, and I see all the supercars on the streets in London, and there's something in the back of my head that wants another supercar. And I've got a Porsche Taycan Cross Turismo as my daily car. And I popped in to get some work done on it at Porsche recently in Manchester, and opposite is the Ferrari garage, and I popped in there, and an 812 GTS is absolutely up there as probably my dream car at the moment, but there's no way I can justify paying overs on a car. It's just the way I've been brought up, I can't do it. And where we are in the economy at the moment, I think we're in a inflection point a bit like 2007-8 again, where there could be a dropping off in car pricing. So my theory is buying a classic or two is probably going to stand me in reasonably good stead. And then when the car market crashes, I'll dive in and buy an 812 GTS, but who knows? I started off by saying that my family were into motorsport, and really I can finish off by saying my family are still involved in motorsport and in cars to this day. My daughter, who is 15, has just started sitting in with me as my navigator on my rallies. So when we came 4th at the weekend, I was only able to be 4th in that rally because of my daughter sat next to me calling out the pace notes. And I've also bought her a BMW 328i field car, which sits outside where we're talking now, and she's prepared that with stripes and coloured wheels and a sticker bonnet, and has enjoyed hooning that around the field. We had her in an MX-5 last year to learn the skill, and I hope that she'll start doing the Junior Rally Championship next year in a Citroen C1. So I'm trying to carry on that enthusiasm, but the other 2 females in the family haven't quite got the memo, because they are deeply immersed in ponies, which make cars look seriously cheap.